Now, living at the crossroads, we all as humans inhabit a worldview that is a grand story about everything. This is a general cultural phenomena, and the authors of the scriptures or the Bible is no exception from this. We know from our readings that the biblical stories, they appear as the outcome of a long historical process. But at a closer examination, we will also discover that on the deepest level, they form what we could call a grand narrative. A narrative that proceeds in stages and in substages. And since the actions have to do with the persons involved, and in this case, divine action is central to the stories, such stories are not mere recordings of what actually happens in history. They are actually loaded with a much deeper meaning arising from what I would call the undergirding worldview horizon. That is a set of ideas by which we understand and we interpret these actions and these events. It's generally recognized that we all inhabit a particular narrative and a worldview, as we started saying. We inhabit it whether we are conscious of it or not. And in this series or this presentation that we open, the aim is actually to explore the underlying worldview behind the biblical narrative. That is, we are going to let the biblical text tell their own story on their own worldview premises. So we want to revisit the biblical world of thought. This is the aim. In a series of 24 presentations and 9 supplementary studies, we are going to revisit its deeper rationale. And you may ask, why should we do this? Has these questions not been settled long ago? After all, the biblical story has been around for a very long time. In Europe, we live with 2 major stories or worldviews, and they have competed about the allegiance of our minds and our hearts. 2 different ways of understanding life, existence, and the universe. 2 meta-narratives that claim to be the true story about everything. There is the humanist story that is rooted in the ancient Greek past. And then there is the Hebrew story, that is biblical story that is rooted in the ancient Hebrew past. Leslie Newbin expressed it like this: both the biblical and the humanist story have to do with history and the interpretation of what happens. And he continues by saying that the humanist secular narrative is rooted in what we could call an assumed evolutionary past that constitutes, should I say, the deeper interpretive lenses for our understanding of life, existence, and the universe, where everything is understood in terms, as he says, in terms of the progressive development of human mastery over nature by science and technology. A process which, according to him, is believed to lead to an increasing freedom and material prosperity. And it's a story about, should I say, the ascent of humans over nature as the ultimate master or lord of the universe. While on the other hand, the biblical story of everything is rooted in an assumed divine creation that has been disrupted by humans, but is to be restored by God when He will make all things new. That is a story about God as the ultimate Lord of the universe. So the plot line between those two stories will go like this. The first one, the secular humanist one, looks like this. It begins with evolution, it leads to progress, and finally human progress or triumph. The plot line of the biblical story begins like this: God's creation, human disruption, and finally God's triumph over all the destructive forces. So both worldviews actually offer a comprehensive set, should I call it, of ideological lenses or ideas by which we understand and interpret everything about ourselves and about the world and the universe in which we live. And it is worldviews that actually gives us guidelines and directions to our lives, our values and our actions and our outlook on everything. In other words, it provides answers, should I say, to some of the deepest questions we as humans are asking, like this: who are we? Where are we? Why are things the way they are? And we could add, can anything be done about it? Can we do anything about it? Can anybody else do anything about it? While the humanist secular, should we call it, the scientific worldview is not the only competitor to the ancient Hebrew Christian story, it is by far the most formidable challenger in our culture. Thus, we all live at a crossroads between two major understandings of life, existence, and everything. Two worldviews that compete for our allegiance and our minds and our heart. And this titanic battle for our allegiance and our minds have now gone global. So the big issues are not dead at all. They are not settled. History has not come to, should I say, an end and with a single winner, as proclaimed by Fukuyama some 20 years ago. History has come to an end, he declares, with one single winner. So the great worldview battles undergirding all the conflicts that are raging on this planet are far from over. Now, worldview, to look a little closer at it, is a paradigm of ideas and values and theories or mental models by which we understand everything. The fact is, we don't see things as they are. We all wear glasses, mental glasses. Something through which we see, but something we hardly ever look at unless some dirt obscures our vision or whether something else happens. We just look through them. So with the risk of oversimplifying what we are talking about here, I will say it like this. We all have brain and senses. Our senses, like feeling, seeing, smelling, touching, hearing, and so on, are avenues to our brain by which we do the processing and the thinking, and by which we perceive objects, and by which stores all the experiences and all the impressions that we have had. And we could actually say it like this. We could call it the black box of our thinking. For the brain will store and it will order and it will attempt to process everything that we have seen, everything we learn, everything we experience, and it will try to make sense out of it all. That's the experience we all have. And it will try to make sense out of what you have seen with your senses by some kind of theory or mental model which are located, should I say, at the bottom of your thinking process. This is what we are not thinking much about, but we are thinking in terms of it. We could call it first principles of our thinking. This is simply a set of ideas that has not been built into us, so it appears. It is something we have received through some kind of cultural and educational path or process. Should we compare it with it like some kind of software that are being given to us by our education, cultural environment, before we were even adult enough to be able to do any critical thinking about it or any reflections? These are ideas that we tend to hold, and we hold them true beyond any critique or doubt, unless they are shaken by a crisis or by being challenged by another set or another worldview. So whatever subject we are looking at through our senses and we have under consideration, we will always see and interpret it in the light of, should I say, the first principles or ideas that are sitting deep in our mental hard disk. So a worldview is simply a paradigm that can be stated in very, very simple terms. It is a view about everything, and it may be actually stated in a single sentence or two. The rest is just a question of logic. If that was complicated, don't worry. It's simpler than you believe. The humanist, should I say naturalist views, can be stated as follows. Atoms are all there is in this universe and the laws of nature. Beyond this, there is nothing. This is a simple statement about everything. The rest is a question of logical deduction, and your mind will start doing it whether you are aware of it or not. And whatever is must be understood in terms of the inner dynamics of atoms and the forces and laws that rules the atom. On the other hand, the biblical theist view could be stated like this: God is all there is and what he has created. Beyond this, there is nothing. And whatever is in this universe must be understood in terms of God's rationality, values, and dynamics. So here we are encountering two fundamental views of the universe about ourselves and life and existence. These are the mental glasses through which you see the world, and both claims to be telling the true story about everything. A brilliant physicist, the late Stephen Hawking, often called the Einstein of our time. You have all heard about him. He was the one sitting in this chair, struck down by a deadly disease, but he spoke through a mechanical device. We have all heard about him. He claimed that the naturalist, humanist view of the world began with Thales, and he's right, or Miletus, that was in Asia Minor, some 2,600 years ago. And he says the following: and so began the long process of replacing the notions of the reign of gods with the concept of a universe governed by laws of nature. Now, I want to say this is a very, very sharp observations by a very, very sharp mind. What he's saying is that with Thales or Miletus, 2,600 years ago, a worldview began to emerge in which laws replace the notions of gods within the European intellectual culture. And it has been leading to what I would call a titanic struggle of ideas that has been going on and which has now gone global. The two views have fought for the last 2,000 years. They have merged, as in the Middle Ages, into a deep synthesis, only to fly apart again in the Reformation and especially the Enlightenment, and exploded within the last 200 years in our face. And now we again are seeing a search for a synthesis. The reason for this deep titanic struggle between those two ideas that are being expressed here is the fact that the two ideas have a big common denominator. They have something in common. As Einstein puts it, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. And Stephen Hawking adds, the universe is comprehensible because it's governed by scientific laws. So you are dealing with two competing views about the world that claims that that the observable universe is intelligent. It is ordered, it's predictable, and it's even fine-tuned in such a way that it allows for biological life as we know it. But the two views, they deeply disagree on what is the mystery behind the laws of the universe and its function. Whether such laws are in cosmos itself, that is in the atoms themselves, or whether they are located in a rational, even benevolent, eternal being called God. This is where the difference is. Stephen Hawking, with his naturalist definition of natural law, simply states, because there are laws like gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. It is not necessary to invoke God to set the universe going. Again, a very sharp observation from his point. Now, of course, his argument depends on his perceptions of what laws of gravity are all about. A perception that is really determined by his definition of the universe at large, that is of nature. Laws being seen by him as some kind of cosmic grid or necessity that just is and then determines the origin, order, and predictability of everything else. His view of the universe is accordingly deeply deterministic, a view that he swears to with all his heart. And he calls that necessity grand design. Laws being the creative agent. Now Stephen Hawking sees the emergence of an intelligent being that we call humans as one that can observe and understand and thus potentially master the universe or the processes of nature. And he actually sees it at the great outcome of a process of evolution. He says, the fact that human beings have been able to come close to understanding the laws governing us and the universe is a great triumph. In other places he simply says the ability of man to grasp and utilize and control nature and its laws is simply the greatest triumph of human reason. And he adds that this is going to make man the ultimate master of the universe. He says it like this in his book, The Grand Design. Although we are puny and insignificant in the scale of cosmos, this makes us in a sense the lords of creation. That is, the masters of the universe. That's his vision. In other places he simply say it like this: God did not create the universe, but the universe created a God, that is humans. So by knowing the forces, the natural design, and the laws governing everything, humans can begin to master their own destiny. They are no longer at the will and whims of nature itself. By navigating the forces of the universe through science and technology. So he's completely in line with what Newbigin observed. The state of evolution has now reached a new level, the Anthropocene level, beyond natural selection. Man is now the master of the game. Now, that humans are rational beings that can begin to master nature by their knowledge of the laws and the rationality of the universe is an observable fact. This is something we can no longer deny, especially the last 100 years have proven this beyond any questions. By our rationality and our mastery, our knowledge, we have discovered the secrets of the atom. And we have been able to master it and now created, should I say, an atomic threat or nuclear threat. And our mastery of nature has now shown that we are capable of creating a climate crisis too. So to take the logic of Stephen Hawking just a little further, on his own naturalistic premises regarding the emergence of a being that has a rationality that can turn him into the master or even destroyer of the universe. We can ask the question, why should humans be the only intelligences that have ever emerged in this vast universe? If you're an astrophysicist, you know the universe is breathtakingly big. The thousands, should I say, the billions of galaxies, and there are billions of planets and suns. Why should human intelligence be the only one that has been generated by the process of the universe? Even better, the existence or the emergence of a superintelligence that we would call God if we ever encountered one. The issue is therefore no longer could a rational intelligence master the universe? We are in the process of proving that is possible. The issue is not whether there are rational intelligences in the universe. Our own existence is evidence to this fact. The issue is not whether rational intelligence can master and navigate the forces of nature through a knowledge of its laws. The real question is whether the presence of such personal intelligence beings is the outcome of a law-driven natural process, as Stephen Hawking believes, or whether such a personal intelligence is the originator of such a rational, ordered and law-bound universe. That's the question. The big question is nature the author of intelligence, or is intelligence the author of nature? You can't have it both ways. It's an either or. And I would say this is still an open question. On that question, the jury is still out. That's the reason why we will even engage with the question. We do not consider it settled. Now, as observers of nature, we only see the behavior of the universe, how it actually functions. And the processes through which it functions, we may even be able to utilize it, and so on. We do not see the deeper causes themselves. That's not what we see. Who has ever seen the laws of nature? We only see the effects of them. The rest is simply and intelligent guess, by which we form, should I say, models and intelligences, or models and theories by which we seek to explain. To make a long story very short, the worldview that argues that before everything else, intelligence was, is still a very, very serious contender, should I say, in the battle for the mind, in the world of ideas. And to that story we shall now turn. In the ancient story of Job that you find in the biblical literature, there is a dialogue between God and Job. As Job's worldview is being deeply shaken or challenged by his experience, and not the least the arguments of his own friends. Who needs enemies if you have friends like Job? God is seen as saying to Job, and this is what I want to read, where were you eventually at the end of the dialogue? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Surely, you know, when the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy. And at the end of the day, Job had to admit that he actually understands very little, and that his theories about everything about God and the universe is actually falling short. The point is, not only was there a vast universe before the world became a living space as we know it. This is what the text says. But human intelligences are not the only ones in the universe. The morning stars singing together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy. So there was something else, something more before this world was made a living space. Now Solomon, considered to be one of the, should I say, wisest men in the antiquity, not only recognized that the universe is rational, it's orderly, intelligent, but he locates intelligence as a being prior to the physical, as being prior to the physical universe. Speaking of wisdom, he says the following: the Lord created me, that is wisdom, at the wisdom by which this world works and the universe works. That's what he has in mind if you read the context. The Lord created me at the beginning of his works, the first of his acts long ago. Ages ago I was set up at the first before the beginning of the earth. In other words, God's plan for the universe, the grand design for everything, was decided by God before he actually ordered the universe or the world. So whatever laws are in force in the universe, they were the first in the mind of God. So God is the author of a rational universe, and thus the ultimate master of the universe, according to Solomon. So in the beginning was intelligence, according to Solomon. The Apostle John actually sums it up as the first principles for his gospel story about Jesus when he says the following: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. All things came into being through him, and without him no one thing came into being. What came into being in him was life. Now, not only does God hold the recipe of life according to John, the gospel writer, he also holds the recipe for everything else. And everything else arises from the intelligence and rationality of God. This is what he's talking about. It's almost an echo of Solomon. Now, John does not claim that he arrived at this insight through philosophy or natural science, but by something called revelation. That is something, someday, this being behind everything, according to John, turned up in this world, although under cover of a human body. He says it this way: and the Word, God, became flesh and lived among us, and we saw his glory. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known. In other words, John is saying, I did not come to this conclusion through the avenues of natural science or human philosophy, but by a personal encounter, by a being who provided evidence for his own identity that for John was irresistible and convincing. In other words, what is behind everything else was only known through a self-revelation. That is, what is behind everything else one day turned up in our world, and he did it in eyesight of humans. But now I'm already taking you into the journey of the biblical world of thought and its rationale. In short, what we are talking about is the grand narrative that we are dealing with is progressing in major and minor stages and stories and sub-stages, and the plot will unfold like this: creation, human disruption, and finally divine restoration. In other words, one day God will turn up again and restore everything that humans have messed up. Now, the unfolding plotline could also be described like a grand telescope in 3 major sets of lenses. Each stage will provide a set of lenses by which you look at life, existence, the universe, and the world. Describing, should I say, the unfolding of God's plan to restore this planet. It has a beginning stage. It has a promise state where God is issuing a string of promises of what he's going to do. And then it includes a fulfillment stage, or a stage where God will restore everything. And as the story will unfold, the great picture will get sharper and sharper until you get the full view, as John shares with us in the Gospel. So the plot of the story, its unfolding, provides the very principles by which you read and understand the story. You begin with the beginning, and you track the development of the story and follow what proceeds. But more about that reading method as we actually engage. We will not talk any more about it here. We may all have a fading in our culture, or even faulty memory of the biblical worldview and the story which it tells. Here again, we may all have a fading. We may all have a fading and even faulty memory of the worldview story told in the Bible. But in this journey into the biblical story, we will try to revisit the almost forgotten story about a God being the beginning and the master of everything else. But the great surprise is that such an intelligence is not just a mathematical rationality in the universe, but a personal being full of empathy and benevolence. And that will take the story that we revisit to yet another level. And to this beginning story we shall now turn, as our next presentation will be called In the Beginning God. Welcome to the journey.